Hello, my name is Ashley Kofer. I'm the Assistant Director of the Online MBA program here at Baylor University. And today we're at the Foster Campus for Business Innovation. I'm sitting here with three of our executive communication faculty who teach in the Online MBA program. We've got April Rousey, Allison Alford, and Chris Meyer. So I'm going to ask them some questions about our executive communication concentration. Let's get started. April, I'll just throw this one out to you first. If you would, just please introduce yourself and talk briefly about your interest as it relates to executive communication.
Hi, Ashley. As you mentioned, I'm April Rousey. I work on faculty here at Baylor University, where I teach our full-time MBA students management communication. A lot of my interest as it relates to executive communication for our online MBAs stems from my own corporate experience. I've got 15 years of experience in marketing and communications, as well as relationship management. So as you can imagine, weaved all throughout those different roles, communication has been a big part of that.
Great. Allison, how about you?
I'm Allison Alford, and I am a clinical assistant professor here at Baylor University. I have been teaching communication courses since 2005, so I've met with a lot of students, a lot of professionals looking to improve their communication. I earned my PhD in communication studies from the University of Texas at Austin in 2016, and that's when I really started working with executives and mid-level managers looking to improve their communication. So I coach students and professionals on communication techniques, conflict resolution, and essentially how to communicate in the workplace. And I also consult and do workshops through my consulting firm, Good Talk Communication Consulting.
Excellent.
And I'm Dr. Chris Meyer. I teach the negotiation class in the concentration in the online MBA. Been teaching negotiation for about 16 years and think that it's a very important aspect of communication for anyone in any organization. I think there's a lot of opportunity to think about the way that we communicate, think about the way that we interact so that we can get more in our interactions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here. So my next question is, executive communication is a title that's not commonly used in the marketplace. Discuss the concept of executive communication as it relates to this concentration and the intended outcomes for Baylor's online MBA students.
I think the idea of executive communication is one that as executives, as working professionals in organizations, you really have to understand that every interaction that you have has an opportunity to impact others in the organization. And that good communication style, that positive communication, and that very focus toward the outcome can really help when we're trying to work through problems, we're trying to work through issues, or we're trying to make great gains in organizations. You mentioned that we're here at the Foster Campus for Innovation. I think innovation is one of the most important aspects of why we come together as organizations. And without good communication, without good negotiation style, we can't make those leaps so that we can get to innovation in our organizations.
When I think about executive communication, one of the things that I think is this course, or these courses, are for people who want to be executives. And when we think of executives in the workplace, we all kind of have an idea of how they behave, or we think about the power differences between them and us. And this course is for people, this concentration is for people who want to become executives. And so they want to learn how to do communication like an executive. And we offer professional students a toolkit for being able to do that. So they can reach into that toolkit at work and communicate like they're someone in a high power position. And they may not be in that high power position yet, but this will help them get there. And it may feel a little unfamiliar at first to behave as if you're an executive. But I kind of think of it as the saying, dress for the job that you want. This is learn how to communicate for the job that you want. And it might be a little bit like wearing a brand new suit that's maybe itchy or unfamiliar, but then you become accustomed to it. And others look at you and they see you communicating in this way, and it's a natural fit for them to think of you higher in your organization or in a specific role. And their thoughts and attitudes about you help you move there. They help you move into that space.
I'm so glad you brought that up about the executive side of things. So I had a recent conversation with a CFO of a major hospital system. And one of the things that he said that drives the business bottom line is that every single decision that impacts that business bottom line is a relationship, right? So if you're introducing this notion of a system change or a process change, you need complete and total buy-in from your employee population to make that implementation as seamless as possible. So in one of the situations he outlined, he said, we introduced a new billing system and it required a major change in the way that the frontline staff used and worked the process, and he needed them to implement it in a certain way in order to drive the outcomes on a profitability side of things. And he said to me, relationships are a pacing item. I can't expect them to make these changes without the relationship in place and there, and the understanding behind why we are making this change to begin with and how it benefits all of the stakeholders. Communication was central in his devising of the messaging to get that change implemented in a right and proper way.
It really sounds like the building block of any successful organization is effective communication. All right, guys, so next question, if you would talk about the types of experiences such as research, consulting, industry experience that you have that informs the classes that you teach.
I'd be happy to start on that one. My research is centered on relationships and how people in relationships help construct their roles. And so that's kind of goes with the idea of fake it till you make it. Sometimes we don't know how we're supposed to behave, but we learn how to behave through our relationships with other people. And particularly, my research has centered on how parents actually impact adult children and their behavior and their communication skills. And while our students may not be thinking of their parents at the forefront of their mind, a lot of us might say that we've been influenced by our parents, their careers, their suggestions for our careers. And so when I am creating a course, or when I'm thinking about things to do in a course, I always have that idea of relationships at the front of our mind. And we have so many types of interpersonal relationships, those with our family and those with our colleagues and friends. And sometimes colleagues and friends are similar. So I always start from a relationship perspective when thinking about how to teach communication. And that goes back with what April was just saying about relationships. But in order to understand a relationship, I have to think about the other person in that relationship. So I can't just think about myself and what I want to get across and what I hope the outcome will be of this discussion or this interaction. I have to start by thinking about my audience. Audience is a term that when you bring it up makes people think of an auditorium full of people, but really our audience is as simple as the person sitting next to us or the person we go to lunch to, the person or people we're emailing, the thousands of people who may read our tweet or our Facebook post. And when we think about those people, then our communication messages can be more strategic and ultimately, as you said, more effective. And effective communication is really our goal.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, in the executive communication concentration, I leverage a lot of my corporate working experience to bring into the design elements of the course. And as Allison mentioned, audience focus and audience empathy is right up there. So in one of my past roles, designing newsletters, overseeing copywriters to produce newsletters with a readership of 130,000, also involved in a corporate website redesign. Thinking about the various audiences helps to drive the messaging, and then it informs my design decisions on how I can strategically meet those objectives. So transferring some of those frameworks that we've learned empirically and also through research, bringing them into the courses in executive communication is very much top of mind for me.
My research focuses on motivational factors in human interaction for the most part, and I like to do that in the context of negotiation. My underlying belief is that every interaction that we have with others is a negotiation. We're trying to achieve more than we can on our own, and that interdependence drives what we do in those interactions. So understanding that and understanding why people do things in organizations is really important to me. So that's kind of a research focus. That comes from my time in industry. Before I had this academic career, I worked in sales, marketing, and management roles in startup software businesses. And so we had to master those interactions in order to survive as an organization. And some of those struggles have really informed the research that I do, and that really informs what I do in the classroom. And I take that out and in a consulting role, mostly I do training for organizations that are interested in negotiation, better interactions. I also have done a number of keynote speeches for organizations that are really interested in bringing a message to their organizations about how these interactions can impact not just their day-to-day, but long-term strategic aspects of their organization.
I've never really thought about the idea that everything is negotiation, but now that you say it, it starts making sense.
In week one, I'm going to try to change your mind.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to push you down that path to think about things a little bit differently. And it changes the way that we interact then, because if we think, Ashley's here to gain something, Chris is here to gain something, we're all here to gain something together, how can we work together to achieve that more? Then it makes the interaction a lot more productive.
Chris, I love hearing about how you put industry and academics together with your teaching, but then what I think is great is that you're also practicing it by going out and training others how to use it. And so, one of the core beliefs in academia is that we do the scholarship, we do the research, but that it is so valuable to put it into practice. It can't just stay right there in that academic journal. We have to do the work of getting out there to speak to people. And when I go out and into industry and lead workshops with folks, a lot of times those are in conflict resolution particularly, because it's hard to be in a workplace with people who have a variety of experiences with how to manage conflict. So some of them want to run away, some of them are stonewalling or giving the silent treatment, and others may be aggressive sharks. And we can go out there and give people tools that come from research. They come from study that we have done about what works in big organizations, and then we can take it even into a small local one, and we can see an impact right away in people's behavior. And just by doing the workshop together, they feel a sense of a buy-in. We're all going to try this, we're all going to use this same toolkit, and we're going to make this workplace better. So ultimately, I love that it changes people's lives.
And that's so applicable to our online MBA students because they are full-time working professionals. So they are literally taking your classes at the same time as they're working full-time, and so they can learn something, a strategy in your classes, and turn around maybe even in the matter of an hour and go to a meeting and apply what they've learned, start applying the things that they're learning from you all.
And Ashley, that's the goal. Truly it is. That's probably the biggest criteria on the litmus test of what makes it into the course. It's what not only can we use to help stand up your skills for application tomorrow, but thinking ahead, which is part of the executive part of that, is what can I use and leverage in the next 5 years and 10 years? So skills not just for today, but skills also for in the future, and we teach you how to develop those skills on your own after you've left the classroom.
I love it. That's so great. So communication is critical in the business world, whether it's a business pitch or a strategic negotiation. Discuss the role that effective communication plays in the workplace and the current state of that type of communication today.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's interesting. Every single GMAX survey, recruiter survey that you see has communication skills in the top 5, right? Which speaks for itself, even besting some of the more technical or hard or data-driven skills. So it shows and communicates or signals to me that there's a need in the marketplace for enhanced communication skills. And so that's what our aim is a real intervention to help develop those types of communication skills, just because they are top. Many employers are frank and candid and will simply say, we can train for the details, but we're going to hire for fit. And a big part of determining or signaling fit is your communication style.
Right, and you know, we call those our sharp skills, right? And what I love about that term is sharp indicates that's something that I can keep sharpening over time. It's not just good skills or, you know, I got there, I earned it, I got to this level, I'm a communicator. We have to sharpen those skills over and over again. All of us continue to sharpen those skills. And so we want people to think of communication in that way. It's not something that we're saying, oh, you know, you're not good enough at it, so come take our course. But rather, everyone starts at their own pace, and then we have to sharpen those, and that is what they're looking for in the workplace, particularly for those professionals who want to move up. These are the ways they can move up. They know the systems in their company. So what is the one thing they need to start moving up and showing others that they have what it takes to move up? Sharpening these communication skills.
I'm so glad you brought that up. The bad news is no one was born a skillful communicator. That's also the really good news. It can be sharpened. It can be a craft that you hone over time. And that's the message we bring.
And you know, it's also valuable for career switchers. A lot of MBA students may be looking to change, either to a different industry or a different company. And we can get a little lax if we've been in the same organization for a time. And so what can prompt us to be able to show others our value and what we bring to their organization, sharpening those communication skills. As April said, the next company or the next job, the next position level up, they'll teach us what we need to know for our day-to-day tasks. But they can't teach us how to communicate respect, civility, how to praise others while still encouraging constructive feedback. And so those are the things that you can get out of the executive communication concentration here in the Baylor OMBA.
And I think that when I approach it at that very granular level of every interaction. And if we go back to the every interaction idea, it's the opportunity to move up, it's the opportunity for the new job, it's the opportunity for new skills, but it's when I pass my boss in the hallway, how am I going to integrate what I'm learning in the MBA? How am I going to take that and apply it in that situation? Because I think that is just as important as some of the more polished presentations that you have to give, some of the more formal things that we do in our day-to-day organizations. So understanding that changing your mindset about how you communicate and to whom you're communicating is really important. If I have the skill, then I don't fear walking into a situation where I've got somebody that's levels above me. I don't fear having a situation where I need to communicate with a board of directors. I can very easily do that because I'm ready, I'm prepared, because of the mindset change that I've taken on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Chris brought up a really great point earlier too, where he said basically every interaction is a negotiation, right? And it does introduce this notion of persuasion into our business discourse. And I think one of the things that sets the Baylor Online MBA program apart is that we're talking in this communication concentration that there's a difference between motivation and manipulation. So our emphasis centers on, in every interaction, the ethical component of executive communication as well.
That's a great point to bring up as well. So if you will, talk about the courses that comprise the executive communication concentration and the rationale for including each one.
Sure. Negotiation was included after a bit of discussion because I think that everyone in the room, when we were talking about how executives communicate and what important skills were necessary to communicate, negotiation stood out as one that may not initially look like a communication course, but I believe is really about communicating the value that people bring to the interaction and communicating that in such a way, in a positive sense, so that people can understand this is exactly why we should work together. Negotiation isn't about what do I want to get. Negotiation isn't about how do I protect myself and defend myself from what you want to get. Negotiation is about how do we work together so that we can maximize the interaction. And without that interdependence, without that working together, there's no reason to negotiate. So I think that it falls very well into this communication idea, particularly when you go back to that idea that every interaction can be a negotiation, and that different approach to working with people. And we start in week 1 with, you may have some ideas. You've seen movies, you've seen TV shows, everybody's seen negotiations that go bad. Everybody's been in negotiations that go bad. I've been in negotiations that go bad. Now, how do we take that experience and how do we leverage that so that we can have better interactions? And the way that we have to do that is we have to be open. And that means maybe throw out some of the old ideas. Maybe think critically about some of the ways that we're doing negotiation. And I think that it plays really well, particularly when it's paired with these classes, to leverage people into a better way of communicating.
Great. Allison, how about you?
Yes, so the strategic communication course is absolutely the bread and butter of the executive communication concentration. It is the basic toolkit that we need to use communication in the workplace. We call it strategic communication because we want our professionals to know that they can make communication work for them. So not only is it's not something, communication is not something that just happens, and it's not something that just happens to you. It's a tool that you use. And again, strategic also lends, the word strategic also gives us the idea that we're aiming at something, right? We have a strategy, we have a plan and a focus. And so in this course, we talk about how to think about our goal for communication, the purpose, what is our goal, what am I looking for? And then which communication techniques can I put together to get there? So one of the most fundamental aspects, again, of communication is who is in my audience. And when I think about who is in my audience, I think about what does he or she want or they want, okay? That's the fundamental you attitude that we explore from the very beginning. And now in strategic communication, I want to try to get this other person, in kind of like negotiation, to do what I want them to do. But ethically speaking, this isn't about just making them do something so that I win. This is about finding out what they want so that we can both win. If I can meet their needs, potentially they have power needs or face needs. If I can meet those needs, then they can feel good and I can feel good, and we can have then an effective communication scenario. So when we think of effective communication, it means what I wanted to happen happened with my communication, because we have a lot of instances of miscommunication, and we don't always know why they went awry or how they were misperceived. And so in this course in strategic communication, we're looking at the micro level and the macro level. So we're looking at person-to-person relationships, my boss walking down the hall, but we're also saying if I'm standing in an auditorium, I want to give a TED Talk. How do my slides look behind me? And how do I address a large room full of people that I'm trying to impress? All of those things go into the strategic communication course.
Great. And April, tell me about the Communicating with Data course.
So finally, Communicating with Data. This is a relatively new course addition for this specific concentration. And if you've listened to any of the promo videos for the other concentrations, you'll hear a recurring theme. Data is the currency for business in the 21st century. So the impetus behind Communicating with Data really stems from a recent 2019 Harvard Business School study that shows that business investments in data analytics have oftentimes failed to return a sufficient return. And a big reason behind that is just because data as a driver for insights is nothing new, but data as a driver for decisions is relatively new. So situated in there is communication, right? So talking through the data. What does the data mean? What does the data do as far as helping us make a decision on what types of business decisions what can we do with this data? So communicating with data will really give student learners the ability to talk about their data insights in a compelling way that will drive business outcomes and decisions.
That's such an excellent point, that data in and of itself it doesn't really do anything. It's what we are doing with that information.
One of the key words that I've heard you use a lot is storytelling, right? And I love that idea. When we think of stories, we really think of something that we all enjoy, right? And they lead us down a path. You know, there's an arc. And so I love the idea of how you can tell stories with the data, and that executives and companies can use those stories to make decisions. But we have to have the storyteller. Somebody has to be able to figure out the picture. So I think that's really cool.
And that's a great delineation. This course is not data visualization in that we are not working in Tableau. We're not necessarily working in Excel to create the data visuals, but we're translating those data visuals for oftentimes what's a non-technical audience. So our ability to connect that for a business question to business outcome is crucial. And that's what we'll talk about more in communicating with data.
Wonderful. Is there a particular scenario or situation or project in your courses that seems to resonate with students, and why?
I think the scenario that really resonates, or the situation that really resonates in the negotiation class, is the simulations that we do in class. One of the challenges when I developed this course was, how do we take what is a traditional method of teaching negotiation, which is going through the different negotiation simulations that people typically do face-to-face. How do we take that and translate it into the online MBA? And through a little bit of trial and error at the beginning, and through a lot of work on the back end, we now have a really good method where we can pair students up. And they may be nearby, they may be across the globe, pair those students up and then have them do a negotiation that's technology mediated. So they go through with Skype, or they use FaceTime, or they use text, or they use email, or they use all of those methods, which is pretty typical, to go through a simulated negotiation and try to come to an outcome, and then reflect on that and work back through and think about, how did I apply the theory? How did this work in practice? And how can I take this and leverage it into my next hour, my tomorrow business meeting? And students have always really enjoyed that. It's a lot of work. And it's really daunting at the beginning when students see that and they think, I've got to work with this stranger. But it's also typical of what they do on a day-to-day basis. Think about how many times you get the email and you need to go through and do some type of negotiation based on that. And this gives them the opportunity to do that in practice where the stakes are low, and then think about it and work through it and think, how would I do it the next time?
Great. Allison?
Yes, so in strategic communication, we do things that you might expect, like creating great slides. And we talk about looking at a company's Facebook page and analyzing what their message is. But a particular assignment that students really dig into and really gives them a lot of thought is about, how do companies apologize? And how can we apologize? And so when we get into looking at companies that have potentially been in a crisis situation, and now they have an ethical responsibility to offer some sort of explanation. And this explanation may or may not include an apology. And is that apology effective? So we talk about the 5 R's of apology. And ultimately, students are tasked with creating their own apology for a real life scenario. And those prompts vary. They may be personal prompts where they're apologizing to someone in their office, but they may also be tasked with writing the big apology that goes out on Twitter, that goes on the company's homepage. And how can we make sure that we are authentically communicating our apology? So students really enjoy that.
Mm-hmm. It's a great example.
You know, I had the great fortune of teaching this most recent iteration of strategic communication, and your comments really got me thinking about a favorite assignment. One of the things that mid-career professionals have told me that they struggle with the most is contributing in the moment, right? So Chris mentioned, you see your boss walking down the hall, or you're sitting in a meeting and you're going through brainstorming or strategy session or sense-making sessions. How do I get my voice heard in the moment? How do I contribute in the moment? And so One of the favorite assignments revolves around a framework that I give them for extemporaneous speaking, and then we run a simulation. Simulations seem to be really well received, but we run a simulation where they're given an unexpected or unanticipated question, and then in the moment they're organizing their thoughts into that framework and they're responding. And it's through technology, which also adds a level of competence building as well, and confidence building as well. So they really seem to like that. It was one of those love-hate relationship assignments. They didn't love it in the moment, but they liked the outcome, what it produced in them through working through that struggle.
It's like working out.
Yeah, right, right.
It's never fun
in the moment.
In the moment,
no,
you
but
don't
the
want
outcome,
to be exercising, but
right?
the outcome is good.
Mm-hmm.
When thinking about who might benefit from the most from this concentration, is there a certain type of student that comes to mind that could be a career stage or workplace situation or anything else you could think of?
So I think that's the beauty about this specific concentration. There's utility in this content, whether you are just starting out in your career, whether you're a mid-career professional wanting to pivot, as Allison said earlier, or whether you're an executive who just needs to hone these skills. So as far as a career level goes, there's a large amount of utility regardless. I also think it's wonderful whether you're trying to manage up within your organization. Also, when you're trying to manage a team, there's some utility there. And I've got great news for those who are housed in a matrix organization. There's skills there for you to be able to influence laterally. So whether you want to use these skills in a professional setting or at your child's PTA, there's a lot of applicability here.
When you said work on teams, that made me think of a particular type of situation that some of our professionals might be in. It reminds me of one of my students who was a mid-career professional running a team at a large food brand, and she was a regional manager, so she had a lot of salespeople scattered across the state. And she was experiencing a problem with one of her sales managers. She couldn't get him to listen, or he just didn't seem to do the things she was directing him to do. And sometimes he was even going over her head to her supervisor, who was a male. And she felt like what was happening was that he didn't like speaking to her as a female. And we did talk about that, but through our discussions, I also learned that her style was just very abrupt. And maybe she had cultivated that style because of workplace issues that related to gender, but she had essentially become very abrupt in her communication and very short and almost commanding. And she felt like she was saving people's time, right? Because her regional salespeople were busy. So she was having short meetings, maybe on the phone, and just kind of telling them what to do. So we discussed the fact that there could be some adaptations that she would make that would really improve this situation. And ultimately, we went back to basics. Who is in your audience? What do we think his needs are? He just may need more face-to-face time. He may need a little bit more praise for the great job that he's doing. And while there may be gender issues at play, there may not. It could just be communication style. And so the good news is that through using some of the communication techniques that we teach in strategic communication course, she was able to get that relationship back on track. And ultimately, she found that he didn't have a problem with her. He just had some additional needs. And she had to get past feeling like that was hand-holding, and instead think, I'm not hand-holding, I am strategically using communication to get what I need by giving him what he needs. And so that's effective. That's effective communication. So she was able to put that into place right away. So I think about professionals who are in their job, they like their job, maybe they're not even switching or going anywhere, but they are just having roadblocks here and there. And the executive communication concentration will equip them with the tools to get out of those slumps.
April said earlier that a lot of organizations are taking the training in-house, and they're training people for their specific roles, the specific skills that they need, but they're not spending a lot of time on the interactional aspect of day-to-day organizational life. Anybody who's interested in that, anybody who is curious about psychology, curious about motivation, curious about how emotion impacts the interaction, I think they can gain a lot from this concentration. Anybody who's curious about why people do certain things in their interactions, that's who needs to think about, maybe I should look at this more critically. Maybe I should think more deeply about when we're interacting, when we have the opportunity to sit with people, when I send that email, what is it saying? What are people thinking? And if you want to think critically about how you interact, this is the spot for you. It's not for everybody. There are people that this isn't their comfort zone and they may want to stay away from it, but there are people where this isn't their comfort zone and they may want to dive straight in and try to understand this more, try to understand this better, and really think through, how do my interactions work? And I think that that's who this is for.
Excellent. All right, what could a student expect to take away from completing this concentration?
I have a lot of students that contact me after graduation, contact me after the class, and tell me what they take away. And what they take away is a different view of how they interact, a different view of their negotiations. I said earlier, everybody comes in with a bias. And the bias, it's not a pejorative term about how you view things, it's just how you view things based on what you've been through. So if we're willing to address that and think about things differently, you can come away with a new mindset. You can come away with new skills, new opportunities, new ways to interact, new ways to negotiate. And a lot of those new ways can lead you to greater gains than you would have found if you continued to do things the way that you're doing them now.
One thing that students can take away from the executive communication concentration is just a better understanding of how people work. How do they tick? What motivates them? And I believe there are a lot of business people who feel like, I'm not a people person. I don't get it, or that's not my strength. And this will allow you to become more like that. You will better understand why people communicate in the ways they do. And if I can understand why, then I can impact changes. So I can make changes in myself, and I can make changes in my organization.
That's a great point. To tie in with that nicely, there are very few individual contributor roles within business where it's strictly you contributing to the business bottom line. So whether you are managing teams or whether you are relying on influence from other departments, and which includes individuals, right, in other departments, you can use these skills to drive the outcomes of your own personal and professional effectiveness and contribute to the effectiveness of your organization.
Thank you all. I've been secretly wishing I could take these courses after talking with you, so thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Ash.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.